$400. That's what a rusted, seized-up metal clamp sold for last year. The exact kind of thing sitting in your garage right now, covered in dust, that you've walked past 100 times without looking twice. Right now, in sheds and attics across the country, tools like this are sitting one scrap metal run away from disappearing forever. Today we're counting down 10 rusty tools that look completely worthless, but could be sitting on a small fortune. Stick around, because the last one on this list nearly sold for 5 figures, and it was almost thrown in a burn pile. Let's start at number 10. Old wooden-handled chisels. A metal collar near the blade, the handle often cracked, the maker's stamp faded almost to nothing. Most people find a set like this and figure it's scrap. Dull edge, ugly wood, straight to the bin. Here's they miss. Before the mid-1900s, top toolmakers forged chisel blades from high carbon steel that holds an edge far longer than anything sold today. And the socket design, where the handle sits inside a metal collar instead of being pinned through, was a mark of serious craftsmanship, not a cheap import. A set like this turned up in a rolled canvas pouch during a shop clean-out in a small Midwest town. Most of the chisels were unremarkable, except one carrying a stamp that matched a respected early toolmaker. Cleaned up and sharpened lightly, that single chisel sold to a collector for $210. The ironic part? The family had already set the whole roll aside for the scrap pile. 3 things to check. Look for a maker's stamp near the collar. Confirm the handle sits inside a metal collar rather than pinned through, and never regrind the edge aggressively. A light sharpening keeps the value intact. But number 9 is even easier to miss completely, because most people don't even know what it is. A small, boat-shaped tool with 2 handles and a short blade in the middle, the spoke shave. Most people mistake it for a strange mini hand plane, or don't recognize it at all, and it gets left behind during cleanouts. Here's the detail that matters. Spoke shaves were used to shape curved wood, wagon spokes, tool handles, chair legs. The best ones were cast iron, with real weight in the hand and a flat, machined sole. Cheaper stamped versions feel thin and hollow. One turned up wrapped in an oily rag at the bottom of a wooden toolbox in an old barn. The adjustment screws still turned smoothly. The sole was flat with no pitting. A specialist confirmed it as an early adjustable model. It sold for $180. Quick checks. Feel the weight first. Real heft usually means cast iron. Check the sole for flatness. And look for adjustment screws near the blade. An adjustable mechanism almost always points to a better, older example. We're only 2 items in, and already these numbers are climbing. Wait, you see what happens by number 5. An L-shaped blade with a wooden handle at one end. The froe used to split wooden shingles straight from a log before sawmills existed. Most people who find one think it's a broken hatchet or some homemade tool, because nothing like it is sold in stores today. Here's what separates an ordinary froe from a valuable one. Blacksmith forge examples show visible hammer marks along the blade and a slightly irregular handle socket, since no 2 were struck exactly the same. Factory versions from the early 1900s are smoother and more uniform. One was found leaning against a fence post on a wooded property, rusted to an orange crust, nearly tossed into a brush pile with old fence wire. A local historical society member spotted the irregular hammer marks first. Once confirmed, it sold to a tool museum for $430. What to check? Hammer marks along the blade, slight asymmetry in the handle socket, and never sand or grind the blade smooth, because that erases the exact evidence that makes it valuable. We're building towards something big here, because number 7 turned into local news for 2 years straight. A wooden-bodied plane with brass fittings and an adjustable fence, the plow plane, used for cutting grooves along the edge of a board. Most people see the tangle of wood, metal screws, and moving parts and assume something's broken or missing. Here's why that confusion works in your favor. Completeness is everything. A plow plane with every original part, the adjustable fence arms, the wedge that locks the blade, can be worth many times more than the same plane missing even one piece. Certain mid-1800s makers used brass fittings and ivory-tipped fence arms, an instant sign of a premium example. One was found disassembled inside an old tool chest that had been repurposed for garden supplies, its parts scattered among seed packets. A careful buyer spotted an ivory-tipped fence arm poking out from under a rusted rake. Reassembled and confirmed complete, it sold at auction for $980. Checklist: count every part first, look closely at the fence tips for ivory or bone inlays, and check the arms for cracks. A cracked fence arm is hard to repair without losing value. A curved wooden handle turning a chuck that grips a long spiral drill bit. The hand crank auger, sometimes called a bit brace. Most people assume it's decorative, some kind of old farmhouse wall piece, not an actual working tool. Here's what changes the value fast. The bit matters as much as the brace. Early manufacturers stamped their bits with a size number and maker's name, and a complete set sorted in its original wooden box brings far more than a single loose brace. A lone brace might fetch $20 or $30. The same brace with a full matching bit set can climb into the hundreds. A wooden case with a sliding lid sat forgotten under a workbench for decades. Inside were a brace and 11 matching bits, still sorted exactly as packed at the factory. The family nearly sold the whole case for $10 as a single lot before a neighbor asked to take a closer look. Once confirmed, it sold to a specialist collector for $520. Check the brace for a maker's stamp near the chuck, count the bits for a complete matching set, and inspect any wooden case. A slotted case built for that exact set adds real value on its own. Halfway through the list now, and we haven't even gotten to the tool most people have literally never heard the name of. A rusty metal cross shape, the Cooper's adze, used by craftsmen who built wooden barrels before mass production took over. Most people have never heard the word Cooper and have no idea what the curved blade was ever used for. Here's why this category runs deep. Barrel making required an entire specialized tool kit, and very few of those tools survived once largely disappeared by the mid-1900s. A genuine Cooper's adze, with its distinctive curved blade for shaping barrel staves, is rare simply because so few Coopers ever existed compared to blacksmiths or carpenters. One was buried under decades of junk in a sagging barn, mistaken for a broken axe and set aside for the scrap pile. A tool historian helping clear the property recognized the coopering pattern immediately. Once authenticated, it sold to a specialty collector for $760. What to look for? A distinctive curve unlike any standard axe, a maker's stamp near the eye of the tool. And never assume an unfamiliar shape means broken or homemade. Some of the most valuable tools are valuable exactly because nobody recognizes them. A hammer forged as one solid piece, head and neck flowing together with no seam, the hand-forged claw hammer. Most people see a worn handle and rusted head and figure it's just an old hammer, no different from a dozen others. Here's the detail that changes everything. Certain blacksmiths forged hammers with solid steel running straight through into the handle, wrapped in leather or wood grips. A design abandoned once cheap wooden-handled hammers became standard. That one-piece construction, especially with the original grip intact, draws serious attention from collectors who specialize in blacksmithing history. One turned up at the bottom of a coffee can full of mismatched hardware, mistaken for scrap. A collector who specifically buys early forged tools recognized the one-piece construction on the spot and made an offer immediately. It sold for $340. Check the neck and head for one continuous piece of forged steel. Examine the grip material. Leather or wood-wrapped originals are less common than you'd think, and never replace a damaged grip yourself before getting it appraised. We're in the top 3 now, and the dollar amounts are about to jump hard. A pair of adjustable metal points sliding along a wooden beam, trammel points, used before large compasses, existed to draw big circles and arcs. Most people who find a set have no idea what it is, and assume it's a broken measuring tool missing half its parts. Here's why completeness matters more than almost anything on this list. A single trammel point alone is nearly worthless. A matched pair, ideally still mounted on the original beam with maker's markings intact, is a completely different story. Certain early American makers produced ornate trammel points with decorative ironwork that collectors, specifically for today. A canvas tool wrap tied shut with a stiff leather cord turned up during an attic cleanout, tucked behind old holiday decorations nobody had touched in years. Inside was a matched pair still mounted on their original beam. Once identified, it sold to a specialty collector for $590. What to check? Keep the pair together. Separating them for individual sale cuts the value dramatically. Look at the beam for a maker's stamp or decorative ironwork, and never split a matched set. Rusted iron hardware pulled off an old barn door, specifically hand-forged strap hinges with hammer-textured surfaces and decorative curled ends. Most people see rusted hardware ripped off a door and toss it straight into the scrap pile without a second glance. Here's what changes everything. Hand-forged hinges made by blacksmiths carry visible hammer marks along their entire length, plus decorative curled or fishtail ends unique to the smith who made them. Factory hardware from the same era is stamped flat and uniform, no individual character at all. Architectural salvage collectors actively hunt for genuine hand-forged pieces to restore period buildings authentically. A pile of rusted hardware pulled from a barn door during a renovation project sat in a scrap bin, destined for recycling. A member of a local preservation society noticed the hammer marks and curled fishtail ends before it went into the truck. Once confirmed as genuine hand-forged work, that single set sold to a restoration company for $810. What to check? Look for hammer marks across the entire surface, examine the ends for decorative curls or fishtail shapes, and never clean forged iron with anything abrasive. A light rust patina is often preferred by restoration buyers. And here it is, the tool mentioned at the very start, the one that nearly hit 5 figures. A heavy iron vise mounted on a wooden post, the blacksmith-made post vise, used to hold metal steady during hand-forging work. Most people assume it's just an oversized rusted clamp, worth scrap price at best. Here's why the rarest examples change everything. Certain early American blacksmiths forged post vices entirely by hand, one at a time, long before factory casting made vices cheap and common. These hand-forged examples show individual hammer marks across the jaw and body, using construction techniques mass production never replicated. Surviving examples tied to well-documented early blacksmiths are exceptionally rare. So few were made, and even fewer survived without being melted down. One was bolted to a rotting workbench inside a sagging outbuilding on a property, being cleared entirely, rusted solid and barely recognizable. A preservation specialist surveying the property noticed hand-hammered construction marks across the jaw that didn't match typical factory work. Research traced it to a documented blacksmith from the region. Once authenticated, it sold at auction for $9,400. What to check? Look at the jaw and body texture first. Factory cast vices are smooth and uniform by comparison. Check for any stamped markings or numbers. And never try to force open a rusted, seized vise. Cracking the jaw destroys both its function and its value in one mistake. 10 tools down, and there's a real chance at least one of them is sitting in your garage, your shed, or a forgotten toolbox somewhere in your house right now. Got something rusty tucked away you're curious about? Drop it in the comments. And if this saved you from tossing something valuable, subscribe for more finds like this.